Mike joined us this past summer, and he's got a long lot to say about himself that I'm not even going to get into. He's from Oklahoma, and now he's a professor at SCAD in Savannah, and he is an incredible artist. So Mike, I'm just going to hand it over to you, and thank you so much for doing this for us.
Well, thank you very much. I've been looking forward to meeting everybody. Sorry, this is as close as we can get for right now, but I really have. I've enjoyed, I was just telling Donna, I was in Atlanta, I guess it was almost a year ago exactly, in SCAD doing a portrait workshop for the students there at SCAD. And my wife and I, after the workshop, were looking around, just getting to know Atlanta a little bit. We came across some sort of newspaper or something to do. And maybe it was a magazine article or advertisement. And it was talking about the Atlanta Portrait Society. I said, I want to be a part of this. Why am I not a part of this? So that's when I started looking into it. And Donna sent me all the information. So I'm sorry that COVID has kind of kept us separated, but this was very flattering that we're talking and was able to enter the last competition and got some questions started and some conversations going back and forth between us. And Donna found out that I do this and asked if I'd be willing, and absolutely. So I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. You know, this is an old quote by Havelock Ellis. I really enjoyed it. I share it with my students quite a bit. But rather than write stories, I thought I'd just tell my story or paint it. It's a little bit better. It starts when these two people, now we don't always have choices where we come from, how we get here, whatsoever. And there's an old saying, you know, the choice you make makes you. Well, in this case, I had no choice. These two people fell in love when they were 16 and 18. And my grandfather was a poor sharecropper in Oklahoma. And his then girlfriend, Goldie, caught his eye. And so they got married, but they didn't tell anybody else. And so eventually, almost a year after getting married, my grandmother's father found out that they'd got married. And she said, you married the SOB, you better live with him. And so before they could move in together, they had to move the chickens out because their first home was in a chicken coop. They are my favorite people on earth. They are the measure by which I'm going to measure God's grace in heaven. The kindness and the generosity, the just genuine love they had for each other. And for me, I just crack up, you know, thinking about it every time. The painting you see here is a painting I did to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary at the age of 19. I didn't know myself to be a portrait artist, but it started early, to be honest with you. Can everybody see that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not the one I wanted, but it's the one you're getting. So
we'll take it.
Let me go back to my grandparents. So this is the portrait I did of them when I was 19. And so they had 3 kids. One of them was a daughter. Their middle child was a daughter. And this is her at the age of 17, getting ready for senior prom. And the tall, good-looking, handsome man there with the big ears, a year later became my father. They literally got married just a few months after this photograph was taken. And then 9 months to the day I was born. And luckily I was born first because you can see I'm the one in the wagon and not the one pushing the wagon. So, again, other choices, you don't always have the choice that you want. The young man you see here holding me when I was a little baby died just a few years after this photograph was taken. So my mom was raising 2 boys on her own for the most part. Later, she remarried another guy with big ears. His name was Harley Lovelady. I guess she just likes guys with big ears. I don't know. And he had 2 kids, so I became part of a blended family. And I'm the one with the circle around me. My older stepbrother had the same name as I did, so it caused all kinds of confusion in my family. His name was Mike. My name was Mike. So he got to be Big Mike, and I got to be Little Mike. That's always a bone of contention. So I overcame the Little Mike part. I found out quickly that I was different from all my other siblings. I was the only person in my family who was ever an artist. This is my very first published illustration. I was 11 years old. I had my mom sign it so it looked like an adult did it. And I won a whole $50 for drawing the hottest 18-wheeler contest. And I realized that if I could make money drawing, this is what I wanted to do. So I've been in art. I've been winning. I've been entering competitions literally since junior high, high school. It's always been a part of who I am. It was Also, one of my secondary choices, I thought that I wanted to be a football player when I was growing up. You know, football is the biggest thing on campus in Georgia and Oklahoma. One of the paintings you see on the right was a painting I did at the age of 15. It's part of the permanent collection, the Chalagi, the Cherokee Museum there in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. It's part of the Trail of Tears Museum. I was the captain of the football team, captain of the all-state football team. I had a full ride scholarship to be a officer and a gentleman at West Point, but the guy who lined up in front of me was 6'6", 302 pounds. And his name was Booger Paul Parker. And that is the biggest booger I've ever seen in my life. And after that, I started thinking maybe art would be a lot safer than football. So I gave up my scholarship to study art at the University of Oklahoma. I had broken my back as a sophomore in high school playing football and started lifting weights just to get bigger and stronger. And I still work out. I've been Mr. Oklahoma, placed 6th in Mr. Teenage America. I've won a number of other bodybuilding contests. And I still work out to this day. I don't care about being Mr. America anymore. It just allows me to eat more Oreos. So that's really all I care about now. I told you I went to the University of Oklahoma. I didn't really get a traditional art education at all. It was really disappointing, quite disappointing, as a matter of fact, for what I was learning or not learning. And one professor really saved this for me, saved my whole professional career for the most part. He was able to set up an apprenticeship for me. I was working with Don Punchatz, the man you see here with the cat. He was one of the top 5 or so illustrators in the nation at the time, headquartered in the Dallas area. And one of my early claims to fame was when Don did the artwork for the game Doom. Now, you guys might not know what Doom is, but I guarantee your kids and your grandkids will. And so this was one of the very first early video game covers, and he used me as the body for the character in the video game Doom. After that, I came back to Oklahoma, where I started teaching and was starting my freelance career. And in so doing, within 3 or 4 years, started a family and realized that the kids had we all know they do, have a much bigger effect on your lives than you planned for them to. But they also changed the kind of art I started doing. Once the kids were there, I'm climbing trees with them. I'm playing with their toys. I'm reading children's books all over again. I started wanting to do the artwork for children's books, and it was a new career for me. And so I started looking into it and became a published illustrator. And now I've got I don't know how many book covers, probably 500 book covers to my name, and some 30 children's books that I've done over the years. And all because playing with kids and reading children's books again. Having kids also, I found out, starting a career as an artist and paying for health insurance was never easy as a freelancer. And when we became pregnant, and I said we became pregnant with our first child, I had to find a way to pay for the doctor's bill. Well, the doctor, who was our obstetrician, was also a doctor who had been collecting my work since I was around 15 or 16. And he asked if I would be willing to paint a picture in trade for his services. So the painting you see on the left is the first painting I ever did of my son. And it was the way I traded the doctor. If I could have just worked out a deal with the hospital, I would have had it made, but that didn't work out that way. And that started a tradition that every year after that, I have painted my kids for their birthday. It's kind of a documentary of their childhood. You'll see that same little boy a year later on the right. And as they've been growing up, I've just been exploring the things that are important to them, different techniques, different approaches. This was Eli getting ready to have a birthday party that promised to be out of this world. Technique-wise, it was done in a charcoal drawing on a museum illustration board. And rather than seal it with a spray fixative, I sealed it with an airbrush by painting a thin layer of this teal green acrylic paint, which sealed the drawing at the same time, and then finished the painting with gouache and a little bit of colored pencil on top of it. So as an illustrator, I've played and experimented with every medium you could possibly deal with. This is another painting of Eli at 4, one of the close-ups of the painting at the same time too, much more traditional oil painting approach. He's the dragon slayer, at least in his own imagination, he is. And of course, he loved Robin Hood. And I was a huge fan of the illustrations of N.C. Wyeth and Howard Pyle and Schoonover and that whole Pyle school. And So Eli liked Robin Hood, so I made him a bow and arrow. I did the best I could as a seamstress and made this costume with him. I couldn't practically get him out of it for years, but his best friend's name was Little John. And so he wanted his best friend to be in the painting, so I painted Little John as his sidekick for the painting. His little sister had just been born, so his little sister Lauren became Maid Marian, and this was little Maid Marian and Robin Hood and Little John in the Sherwood Forest. Of course, growing up in Oklahoma, he learned to love football. He had just lost his first front tooth. This reminded me of a Norman Rockwell approach to painting. Technique-wise, it's done in a mixed media where I'm working on illustration board again, and I would do my pencil drawing, and then I did the underpainting in a burnt sienna gouache. And I could lift the gouache to get some values established. So I'd have my darks, my mediums, and my lights established almost immediately. Gouache has a calcium carbonate kind of chalky quality to it. So I could paint really thin layers of oil paint on top of this. It immediately feels as if it's getting absorbed by the gouache underpainting and makes the painting so much faster. This painting was about, it's 11 by, I think 16, something like that. It was painted in 4.5 hours in the afternoon. So this was a quick, it looks like a large oil painting, but because it's oil and gouache, it's really much smaller than you would think. Continued to paint Eli. He's continued to grow up. The painting on the left was him at the age of 18, just getting ready to graduate high school. This was also one of the paintings that was won an award in the Portrait Society that same year. A few years later, Eli is growing up to become a man. He's living on his own. He's become a musician. You know, I remember when Eli told me he's coming to Dad and said, "Dad, I think I'm going to quit school and go on the road and become a musician." And I remember saying, "Eli, do you know what the difference is between a large pepperoni pizza and a professional musician?" A large pepperoni pizza can feed a family of 4. So he didn't like my answer, but I told him, I understand, I'm an artist. What can I say, you know, about being, making the choice to be an artist? He did. And I said, the one advice I would give you, if you're going to do this, is to learn to live within your means. If you can do that, you can chase your dreams and you will have a lot less of the pressure of the world put upon you. He's done great. He really has. You know, he's doing this, he's making a living. COVID's been a little tough on him because of the, so many things have been canceled, but he had a little sister. His little sister Lauren, as I told you, this is her first year painting. It was also done in gouache as the underpainting, and then as an oil, thin layers of oil on top of it. A little bit of colored pencil if I needed some small little addition of color, but it's probably a 9 by 12. It's a pretty small painting. It really reads pretty well as a finish. As you can see, values and the basic skin tone colors. You can make skin tones of just about anything, to be honest with you. When I'm talking to my students, I tell them that the hardest thing in the world to paint are little white babies. And the reason being is because the subtle transitions between cool and warm, those soft little shadows, hardest thing in the world to get right. If they're not right, it looks like you've got a splotchy baby or something somewhere. This was her at 2. I actually painted this from life, not with her, but with all her animals. So I set everything up. I brought her in. I put her in the outfit. I took the pictures. I put a book in front of her, knowing that would keep her busy for a little while. And I took all the pictures I could for about 15 minutes. She's ready to go after that. So I take her away. I take a doll, put the outfit on that she was wearing, place it in place, and then set all the rest of it. And it was in my studio, and I painted the rest of it from life. So it's just for fun. I'm doing these. The funny thing is, these paintings that are done from love, you know, and that's really all they were done for, it always translates into the work and the quality of the work. This has probably been one of the most licensed paintings that I've ever created. It's been on collectible plates, it's been on posters, it's been on jigsaw puzzles, it's been on blankets, it's been on, I don't know how many times it's been relicensed over and over and over again. Alla Prima life study. Lauren loved hanging out in Dad's studio, and the kids were always free to come and go. There was a TV there, and they had toys there, and they had their little easels at the same time too. And so Lauren had fallen asleep on my little modeling stand, and I was working on a commission that day for mustard for French's mustard and painting people eating hot dogs. And she was so much cuter than me painting hot dogs, so I painted her instead. So this is about an hour and a half study, as fast as I could paint quickly, knowing that she was not going to stay there very long. She did grow up into a beautiful young lady. And first time I really saw her as this beautiful young lady, she was 10. And so she'd been the flower girl for a friend's wedding. So I brought her back into the studio to paint her portrait as she's flowering and growing up. And I've also learned that having a boy and having a girl, there's a huge difference between the two. You know, boys are smelly and dirty and noisy, and girls are worse. They really are. Not that they're smelly or dirty, they're just more of them. Girls travel in packs. So that means you don't have one girl, you have a pack of girls together. And all these girls grew up. There was about 8 of them. They were my bonus daughters, as I called them. So they're always at our house. You know, they were sleeping over. They were going to dance. They were going to church camp together. They were later learned to drive together, and they were dating. That was the scary part. But so I've painted every one of these girls in different portraits throughout their lives, and even some of their wedding portraits at the same time too. This is Lauren as she's getting ready to graduate high school. So I'm painting her portrait here. You can see a close-up at the same time too. This same beautiful young girl grew up to be a mother. She married another artist who is a graphic designer, filmographer. He just won his first Emmy this last year. And they blessed me with a grandchild, a little boy. And so now I have a new person to paint, you know, and I think he's pretty cute. Front sides and back sides, I think he's pretty cute. And so I've been able to paint him, and since he's grown up. And this is just another, when I paint things for fun, this was just me and him going out hunting pumpkins. He was so fascinated because he couldn't see the pumpkins, and all of a sudden they'd be there, and it surprised him. He was fascinated with that. And so later, after he came along, of course, his little sister came along, and she deserved her own pumpkin painting. And I'm here to tell you, this is the fattest little baby girl I've ever seen in my life. She was 11 pounds and 14 ounces the day she was born. So she just started out big and she thinks she can do anything, and she pretty much can. She's pretty cute. So, she, you know, she's got Pawpaw. She calls me Pawpaw. So she's got Pawpaw's heart. This is the newest one I just finished of them. I just did it as, again, just something for myself. It's a little diptych. I painted it in oils. You can see the palette set up there at the same time on the right. The painting above them is their mother and Hendrix while she was pregnant with little Eiley. And so again, I must have, between paintings I have in my house and paintings I've given to them, they've got to be at least 60 or more paintings of their, you know, their lives being documented as they're growing up. Quickly, just because this is a group, I'll show you a little bit how this process works. It's not always the same, but this is kind of a typical process. I transferred it to, this is one of those large birchwood panels that is a shadow box. It's about 2 inches deep. And I placed a nice random acrylic gesso pattern over the whole thing. In this case, because I knew I wanted some of that broken color of having the different brush strokes coming from different areas. And I'm just laying in local color to stain, really, and rather than putting a single imprimatur over the whole painting. In this case, I'm giving it some temperature that comes from underneath. And even while it's still wet, I'll start painting right away. I'm blocking in. I tell my students, my painting process is kind of like my process of talking to my wife. I keep things vague until specificity is needed. You know, I just don't put the details. I've seen too many of my students attacking an eye, and they'll finish that eye and make it perfect. Then they move over to the other eye, and it's different. And it's hard to balance. So I keep the painting always coming up at different stages together. I'm worrying mostly about form and just kind of letting things come almost like they're out of focus, coming into focus. While I'm doing this, I'm also working on transition edges. Whatever I'm working on something, I'm working on where the edges are going to transition to, because it's always easier to make an edge harder later than to take a hard edge and make it softer. So I try to keep things fairly soft in this early stages of the painting. And it just keeps coming up. I keep working and bringing it together. So this was all probably in 1 day's worth of painting, and got the background just blocked in pretty quick. And here you can see probably another day. And then from here, it just maybe a little bit more adjustment to the shadows. And now I'm working my way down. And again, out some of the background, some of the shirt, some of the background, some of the shirt, so I can keep my edge transitions clear all the way through. And some of the way I'm working, if I go back from darks to lights. And then when I'm painting portraits, and this is something I'll only point out here because one of the things that I've tried to do, rather than just capture a likeness, that's important, don't get me wrong, but it's also about what it is and who I am portraying. If it's a formal portrait of T. Boone Pickens, for instance, I'm not just painting T. Boone Pickens, I'm painting T. Boone's accomplishments. I'm painting, you know, why is he being recognized? Where is the portrait going to hang? For my kids, I always feel, whether they're mine or portraits I paint of my kids, I feel a little bit more of that inner child who just bursting to get out. We know they look really good in their Sunday go to meeting clothes, but it's not real. You know, this is real. The holes in the jeans, the scuffs on the fingers or something like that. And that's the part I really enjoy. But in this close-up, you can see that underlying texture that was put down with the gesso at the same time too. And to see how it comes through, and helps break up the color when I'm painting at the same time as well. Here's Eiley. So you can see I tack it much the same way. That rough or the soft edge of the hair is established pretty early. You know, I'm keeping my edges pretty soft all the way through. My transitions between cools and warm. When I'm working on eyes, I'm always doing whatever I do to one, I do the other. I just keep everything balanced all the time. It just always keeps things. And I know Scott, I'm trying to remember his name. I've seen one of his workshops where he'll literally work on the corner, starts in the corner of the face and works all the way down, and it's completely different and it's finished at every stage. And I just can't do that. I'm always balancing the painting as a whole and the different elements that I'm working on at the same time. But because I wanted to finish the day with at least her hands and her skin tones done at the same time, I just made the transition between her face and her shirt and her hands and her shirt. And I could leave this knowing that the day's work was done, and I could come back the next day and pick it up from there. And then from there, you would start working from the background forward. So in oils, I'm usually working from, you know, vague to specific, from darks to lights, from background to foreground, and then any details that need to be picked up, that really need to be, I think, made as an important, whatever my focal point is going to be, then I'll spend a little bit more time with them there. But you can see already that idea of keeping things soft in the background, that out of focus, that atmospheric depth, and the sharp focus of her hair really create that illusion. It's all a lie. We know it's on this flat two-dimensional plane, but it has the appearance of having real depth to it at this stage. And here, and just bring it up until pretty much things are finished. In this case, I was putting a gold leaf around the edge of the painting and also as the divider of the painting. So I put a painted in gold, in an oil, a nice burnt dusky red that I could use as my base. I let it completely dry before I would come in with my gold leaf and paint, lay it in two different layers. One had a golden red color and the other one was just a yellow color, and just let the two leaves be on top of each other. And later, once it was varnished, would seal it all together to hold it. But I just like that sparkle, the different kind of, it reflected and looks a lot like the naturalness of those brown leaves on the ground at the same time. So just something for me. So here you can see a close up of little Eiley. My wife and I met her in grad school. We're both artists. So the conflict of having two artists in the same house and our place is really quite well. We're both illustrators by nature and by training and by trade. I described her, I wasn't sure what she thought of me at the same time. I knew we liked each other, but I wasn't sure what she would think. And so I finally, if anyone gets to know me, knows that I'm demanding and I'm a perfectionist a little bit at heart. And I know that's hard to live with. My clients appreciate it, but so I had to see what she really thought about this. So I had a line. So I told her, I said, I got you figured out. You're just a female Mike Wimmer. And if she took that right, I knew things were going to be well. And if she took it wrong, it wasn't going to work out. Well, she is a female, Mike Wimmer. She's very competitive. She's very creative. She's very much a perfectionist. We still work out together and that sort of thing too. So it's worked out really well for both of us. Now, she had a child named Brody. And so that meant, of course, I've got a new son. That means I've got new pictures to paint. So I've included Brody in his paintings as well. On the left is a painting I did for a children's book called Heroes, and I used my wife as the model, and I used Brody as the little boy getting his temperature taken. The little picture in the middle was done as an alla prima painting, really just being corrected and painted back and forth from a photograph that I took of him at the dinner table. And then the one on the right is a painting I did for his birthday. And it is an oil painting, very smooth. It's probably, I believe it's a 18 by 24. So it's not super big, but it's not super small either. And just using a lot of transparent glazes, some soft edges. It's very soft for the most part. It's on one of those 1184 super smooth quadruple primed oil primed canvases. So it's got a great surface for painting on anyway. Here's my current studio. I've always worked at home. I've been a freelancer really for as long as I can remember. When I had little kids living, I built a studio out back, and it worked really well. It was around 1,400 square feet. It was a living space, workspace, and it was just dedicated to work. Now that it's just Jimmy and I, and we don't have the kids living with us anymore, our house is the studio. We've got a kitchen and we've got a master bedroom, and I think every other house in the room is a studio. You know, this is what's supposed to be the main living room, but it's my main studio. The table you see there in the middle, I'm fairly neat. I keep things pretty well picked up. It's just my fastidiousness. I don't know, I'm kind of detail oriented. Lots of books. This is one of the bookshelves and one of the areas we have. I've got another bedroom that's been dedicated to just storage of art and props and costumes. The other major bedroom is my wife's studio. And so then we have pretty much no other space in our house that's not a studio space. The table that's there in the middle right now is the one I'm sitting at, simply because now that we're teaching online, I've moved my computer in here, and it gives me just a little bit more ease. And we've been stuck teaching online since last March. So it's worked out really well. And I can also give live demonstrations to my students in my rendering classes at the same time. Commercial work. I have done work literally for almost every major publisher in the United States. The painting on the left was done for TV Guide. Remember TV Guide, when you could buy it there at the grocery store and it would have what's going to be on TV this week? You know, things have changed. This was on the cover just as Terminator 2 was being, you know, advertised for the movies that was coming out. Well, a few years later, I was approached by Word Publishing, and Henry Blackaby was doing his series on studying the Bible and historical elements of the Bible. And this particular, he wanted a cover of Moses. He wanted me to paint Moses. And they had seen the painting I did of Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator. He said, Mike, we want the same lighting. We want the same pose. We want the same everything. I said, okay. So I painted Moses as the Terminator, you know, in a sense. Now, I found Moses, you know, the kids were young. I was driving around. It's that time, you know, you're just trying to get them to go to sleep. They're in the car. We're trying to put them to sleep. And we're driving around the little local area. And one of the restaurants had a outdoor seating area. And I see Moses sitting there having dinner. So I go around the block again. I park. My wife says, what are you doing? I said, I saw Moses. I got to ask him to pose for me. And so I learned a long time ago, if you don't ask, the answer is no. So I pulled out a business card. I went up to him and I asked him if he would be willing to pose for me. I'm an artist. I got a project I'm working on. And of course, his construction worker buddies were giving me, yeah, I bet he wants to paint your picture kind of thing and all that stuff. It was pretty funny. And I said, no, I'm really legit. And he decided he would do it. His name is Samson. So it's not really Moses, it's Samson. But Samson is my model. And he became Moses, and Samson works for the city street department in Norman, Oklahoma. He had the long hair, the sunburnt face and everything else, but he makes a great Moses. And it became a very popular cover for Henry Blackaby. Finally, he came to see me. He was coming across country and wanted to meet the artist who did it. So that was great being able to meet Henry Blackaby at the same time too. Now, I teach business classes for the art school here at SCAD, and I've wrote this program almost 25 years ago, and talking about some of the business principles of being an artist and how to make a living. Well, one of the things is I've been incorporated for a long time, and I told the students, whenever you can take things that are a tax deduction, like travel, you should. And how can you make one of your trips tax deductible? And I said, well, whenever I travel to a new city, I always take my portfolio. And I always show my portfolio for two reasons. One, it might open a door of opportunity. And two, it'll make the trip tax deductible. Well, I was out visiting my brother in California, Big Mike. And while I was there, I just was showing my work to Disney and Universal Studios and a couple other places. And I got a lot of rejection. Don't call us, we'll call you. But about 6 months later, I get a phone call from Disney to do the movie poster for the movie Mr. Destiny. So this was the movie poster for the movie Mr. Destiny, Michael Caine, Jim Belushi. I finished it in 4.5 days, very little sleep. I bought a ticket. I had to crate it up. It was still wet. I bought a seat for it in the airline, took it nonstop to California, and they had someone there to pick it up on the other side. That's long before security was crazy and you could still get away with doing that. Well, that led to another project where I worked on a series called The Gargoyles for Disney. And then after that, I worked on this little project that no one has ever heard of called The Lion King. And I did the soundtrack album cover for The Lion King and the second Lion King. And then I started doing pre-production work for some of their other movies, such as The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Pocahontas, Hercules. And then they went digital, and I quit doing work for Disney after that. So these were all done in oil. Since then, I've also done work for the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. Now, I get these weird jobs from weird places. They wanted me to help them design a doll that they could sell in their gift stores. And the reason they did is because for years, I had been doing work for American Girl. So if any of you guys have American Girl dolls or grandkids or granddaughters or daughters, I've painted tons of these backgrounds and tons of these dolls. I painted Josefina. I was part of the crew that they flew out to New Mexico when they were just developing Josefina to develop her identity in pictures. And so I did Josefina, I did who else? It was Kirsten and Molly and Addie and Kaya. I've done so many of these different dolls and their environments. Another series of paintings is done for a Bible correspondence course. I think there was some 60 paintings in this course where I'm painting these epic events of the Bible, Moses parting the Red Sea, or the Battle of David and Goliath, or Christ walking on water. And if you look really close, you'll see I've always wanted to be an apostle, and this is probably the only chance I would ever get. So if you look really close, that little head peeking up over the other guy in the turban, back when my hair was dark, that's me. So this is my chance to become an apostle. I've also been used myself here as an artist. I work cheap as a model, so that's why I'm here. This was one of the advertisements done for the 7-Up, the Uncola series going on. I was teaching at a private Christian college at the time, and so I brought in a lot of my students into the studio. I always pay my models and dressed them up and paid them to act this out. I even found a series of benches. I rented them from a restaurant supply, brought them into my studio just so I could make sure the lighting was under control and bring it all together, and took care of that. I've done tons of book covers, like I said. This was one of a series of 7 different book covers that I was doing for, I think it was Penguin Putnam. It's been too long, I think now. And it was their classic stories, the same stories that I'd grown up reading. And of course, my heroes were some of the same illustrators who had painted these covers. And I wanted these covers to really stand out and make a mark. And so each of these paintings is about 34 inches by 57 inches, something like that. And it's only going to be reproduced this big, but I tend to paint big simply because it's actually easier. It's much easier to paint big with big brushes and big strokes and knowing it's all going to come down, whereas I don't have to worry about that tiny little detail work. I'm much freer. I can be able to do this. Well, you never know what one painting is going to lead to. One job leads to another job, leads to another job. This is the wraparound book cover for The Wizard of Oz. And it was later seen by a company that makes these collectible plates, Hamilton Collections. Maybe you guys have some plates with artwork on them or whatever. And it wouldn't fit. If we go back, you can see that a round plate, the composition didn't quite work. So I had to repaint, but a second version of it, in the sense that still looks like it would now fit. I painted it square because I've learned a long time ago that I own the copyrights to my work. And so it's a way for me to relicense and resell my art. So I'm licensing the artwork for this to be used as a round plate. So you can see what it would look like as a round plate. Compositionally, all the major elements that need to be there are in that round format. But the painting itself now belongs to me. It hangs up here on my wall. I've relicensed this image to be used as calendars, jigsaw puzzles. Last time I saw it, it was a jigsaw puzzle. I'd licensed it a few years ago. It was at Hobby Lobby. I saw it at Hobby Lobby at one of the jigsaw puzzles. So it's still being licensed. It's still being out there and used. And the nice part about that, about every 6 months, I get a check in the mail. It's like Christmas. You never know how much it's going to be. So overall, I've done probably 50 different plates for Franklin Mint and Danbury Mint and Hamilton Collections. And some of those have been extremely good sellers and continue to pay royalties for years afterwards. This is a study of Long John Silver for the cover of Treasure Island. I found a guy who I thought would make a pretty good pirate, brought him into the studio, dressed him up. I mean, I use my imagination as far as I can, but having a model, as we all know, makes everything so much easier. This is what he looks like in the finished cover. And again, I've got if I can turn, I've got one of my model pirate ships over here. I've got another one up on. So these ships I buy simply because they're nice adult toys, but I really love them. And that's the biggest reason. And they're tax deduction because I can use them for my paintings, right? So it works out really well for me. If you'll notice the really handsome, devilish looking muscular guy in the background there, that's me. I use myself as a pirate too. My cover for Tom Sawyer. And again, it's a wraparound book cover. When it comes to these things, I have a little compositional workshop I'll talk about later, but some of your kids, maybe you have read these to your books, but Shiloh is a very famous series of the Beagle. What you're seeing is my transition into the 21st century. I teach illustration and have for years. The painting on the left is an oil painting, and the painting on the right is a digital painting. But you can't tell it's not oil simply because my aesthetic is that I love the brushstroke and I love the work and that sort of thing too. And the art director was such a pain. I knew after working with her for the first one that there would be changes after changes after changes. And making these changes to an oil painting where I have to scrape things away and refix them, I outthunk her, so to speak. And so I told her I was painting in oil. And every time she would tell me she had a new change, I'd say, well, it's going to take a couple of days. I got to scrape the paint away. I would go back into my layers, repaint it, hand it done really within about an hour and a half. But it saved me a lot of frustration, and she never knew the difference. And so it worked out fine. A series of ads for the New York Cotton Exchange. And, everything in this series of paintings were always done as if they were wearing cotton. Everything was cotton, but it's also a seasonal transition from spring to summer to fall to winter. Another series of paintings did for Mr. Clean. In 1992, I was commissioned to paint the new kinder and gentler Mr. Clean. Procter & Gamble had changed their formulation of Mr. Clean to make it kinder and gentler on your skin. So they wanted Mr. Clean to look kinder and gentler. We might remember the old Mr. Clean. He always looked like he was mad at somebody. And so I based this new Mr. Clean on a friend of mine. He's a guy I worked out with in the gym. He was a fireman. His name was Bob Callahan. The funny thing was, by 1995, I'd been doing these for years. And it was, what was it? It was People magazine named my Mr. Clean as one of the 100 sexiest men in America. And Bob, the fireman, started getting the big head after that. So I had to start paying him more to model for me after that too. I also did the brawny paper towel. Another fireman, this was a national competition where it was, you're supposed to pick the new brawny man. And the brawny man that was picked was a fireman from California, LA, So they flew me, the advertising agency flew me out to LA, and I took some photographs of him and painted this within 24 hours in my hotel room and handed it off to them wet. They made the big NBC announcement the next day, and the next morning I finally got some sleep and caught the plane back to Oklahoma and did it that way. So now the difference is, these children's books and some of like the painting for Tom Sawyer, that was a huge painting, 57, 32, something like that, big painting, but it was a book cover. So it was getting paid around $4,000 for a book cover. Brawny paper towel, 24 hours of painting, I get paid $20,000 for that. And it's simply because paintings are priced by their usage, how they're being used. If it's used to market or advertise or packaging, it's always going to be a lot more money. And the fact that deadlines are notoriously fast and quick. The fact that you're forced to be creative under a deadline is always the hardest part about being an illustrator, especially for some of these projects. Some of you guys might remember the Joe Camel ad. Remember Joe Camel, the cartoon character? Well, you might also remember some of the controversy that was caused and how it appeared that Joe Camel was being used to sell cigarettes to kids. Well, after that, they wanted to create a whole new, vision of themselves and a brand of themselves. They wanted to kind of go back to that time when smoking was considered cool and it was part of the American history. So I did a whole series of these paintings, about 60 of them over a 5-year period, of all these historical throwback images of showing kind of that time when America's great. But at the same time, it's back when what's old is new again, and it was a retro throwback. There's also something modern in every particular painting as well. In this case, the girl on the left, they're getting to the train station. They look like they're probably right out of the 1940s, except she has a barbed wire tattoo around her ankle. Whereas the fighter pilot on the right, he looks like a World War II fighter pilot, except he's got a digital watch on. So, there are all of these tiny little hints throughout. Now, I'm not a smoker, never smoked, I'm not really cared to it. So my own little anti-smoking campaign is also in every one of these paintings, hidden very, very, very succinctly. So I've got little skulls and crossbones throughout all these paintings. They're just little on the stamp here. It's right along the stamp on his luggage. There's skull and crossbones on the airplane back here, as if he's shot down the fighter aces and that sort of thing too. So they're hidden in little symbols you'll see around. So no one ever caught it. No one ever found them. So I got okay that, they never kicked me off the campaign. But these were huge. Some of these were a lot of paintings I did. And again, I've always been a businessman, always thought about how can I make more money, monetizing my talent. The painting on the right was the very first one I did in the series. And they just wanted to buy the rights for the painting. That's all they commissioned for. It was going to be a full page ad on the back of the Sports Illustrated magazine. So it's major placement. And I knew, and I was painting it in oil, and the painting itself was almost 5 feet tall. So it's a pretty good sized painting. And I was only supposed to send them the digital file. I was supposed to have it scanned and send them the digital file. But I also knew that if I could just get them to see the original, they might want to buy the original. So what I did in this particular case is I had it framed at my expense and I created it. I had it scanned and I put the digital file and I shipped it to their ad agency in New York City. And I get a phone call, Mike, what the hell is this thing? It's huge. I mean, oh my God. I said, I just wanted you to see it. I was really proud of it. Please, I sent it at my expense. It's not your expense at all. And it had some hinged doors on it. And that wet oil paint, you could smell the wafting. They called me up later, 2.5 hours. Mike, would you be interested in selling this painting? And that was the whole plan. I knew I wanted to buy this painting. And I said, well, sure. Yeah, I wanted it to go to my agent there in New York because he was going to display it in his office afterwards. But sure, we could make a deal for you to buy it at the same time too. So the commission price, the original price was $15,000 for the ad. I added an additional $10,000 on top of that to buy the artwork and the original and all the rights to go with it. And that set the precedent. So I did 60 paintings at those prices for about 5 years. And so advertising pays a lot of money. And so that's why I did. But these things would be painted in a week. Literally from the day I would get the sketches done until I had to be delivered would be a week. And so there's not much time to do some of these things. It was always working late when these came along. I did all the packaging for Huggies diapers for about 11 years. Kimberly Clark was a major client of mine. I was flying up to Chicago and then Madison, Wisconsin area. Again, about every 6 months, I'd be coming up for different meetings, doing different projects. And like I said, painting babies has always been the hardest thing in the world to paint because they have to be perfect. The little model who posed for me this, I use professional models whenever I can and have to. I picked her out of the modeling agency headshot thing, and her mom was going to bring her to my studio to so I could photograph. She had the measles all over the place and splotches everywhere, but I had a deadline I had to make. So I photographed her and then I painted her as if she had perfect skin. So I painted every kind of baby you can think of, crawling babies, walking babies, you know, boys, girls. So I've gotten really good at painting babies for years. Remember the Wizard of Oz painting? Well, that Wizard of Oz painting was seen by one of my regular clients, Milton Bradley. I did some games for them in the past, and they wanted a new cover for their 50th anniversary of Candyland. We've all played Candyland with our kids and grandkids and everything else. So I painted the cover, and I also asked them if I could take a shot at doing the artwork for the inside. And so I did the game board as well. And I even designed the little three-dimensional gingerbread pieces. And that turned into a different project for me. I even went so far as to design the paper cutout, three-dimensional castle in the background. And so I really turned this job into another job, and it won me all kinds of acclaim and awards for years and got me a lot of work from Milton Bradley for a while. But again, it's strange how one job will lead to another job at the same time too. I told you this job came to me because of what they saw in the Wizard of Oz painting and that castle in the background. Well, this painting was seen by Celestial Seasons, and Celestial Seasons wanted a gingerbread man for themselves. And so from there, I did this tea box cover. It's a gingerbread spice tea. And so that turned into more tea boxes. I've done Christmas tea boxes now for years for Celestial Seasons. I just saw this last Christmas, 4 or 5 of my tea boxes all packaged together as a Christmas gift set, so to speak. So this is the Candy Cane Lane tea box. And another one, I forget what this one is, apple something flowers. And this is a cranberry vanilla wonderland, you know, tea. And so I've done something like 22, 23 different box covers for Celestial Seasons over the years at the same time too. Now, remember back in the day when we had to go out and we had to cut our own trees down, and we would drag them through the snow back home, and we would set the tree up and we could smell that fresh pine needles wafting through the, we don't need to do that anymore. Now you just use Febreze to do that. And that's what this illustration was for, to advertise Febreze and bringing that Christmas scent home, and you can spray it in your own house. But it was an advertisement that was used in a Women's Day magazine. Other clients, and Smuckers has been a regular client for years and years and years. The painting on the left was for a simple summer project that they were going to have a lemonade stand kit in a box. And inside the kit, it came with cups, it came with packages of lemonade, it came with a little pitcher, it came with crayons and paper that you can make your own signs. And so that's what I illustrated, bringing this kind of Norman Rockwell scene to life that they used on the box cover. The painting on the right is another painting, this time for one of their annual reports covers, and it shows all, or not all, but a lot of the different breakfast packages and food products that they make under their many different brands of Smuckers brands. Didn't know it, but they own Folgers, they own Hungry Jack pancakes, they own, of course, jellies and jams and things like that as well. More of the collectibles that I've worked on, I told you I've done a number of collectible plates. This was a series of teddy bears from literature for Franklin Mint, all done in oil paintings. and I would bring and set these scenes up in my studio and have as much as I could from life and photography. I worked from both. I mean, photography helps speed things up, but having the real object in front of me gives me so much more of how the shadow subtleties actually play. And I love the ability to work from life. It just gives me more to work from for that particular reason. And kids, again, my kids on the right, the two kids at the top are mine, Eli and Lauren, and then their cousins, Josh and Haley. So this was a family portrait, but is also used for Danbury Mint, and then later for a jigsaw puzzle, then later for a calendar, and later for greeting cards. So it's been relicensed a number of times too. A series of collectible paintings, one for Avon on the left and the other one for Franklin Mint on the right. Series of, they've also been turned into greeting cards. And I also resold this to American Greetings as a gift wrap and as packaging. Another collectible plate, this time for Avon for Mother's Day. And then some historical paintings. And these paintings are about 8 feet by 12 feet, and they all depict different aspects of Oklahoma history. And bringing history to life is never the easiest thing in the world. And especially if you were the kid, I was lucky. I loved history very early because I had one teacher. And it was not about history. It was more about his story. Once I realized these are just stories, and all the mystery and all the mythology that comes from history and where it comes from, it made the images themselves and the historical events much more important to me. This particular painting depicts the moment that the seedlings of what later became Oklahoma were planted. The Louisiana Purchase, when the Americans were buying the whole large Louisiana territory from the French, that big part of the United States, part of that section later became Indian Territory, which later became Oklahoma. If you look close, I was in this painting also as well. I painted myself as a portrait up here at the very top as a French general and put myself in the painting as a painting. So why not? If it's my painting, I can do whatever I want to with it. The hard part is I'm also learning all kinds of things about military uniforms. And I'm looking at the American military uniforms. They were kind of in a transition at this point. There was no real pattern for military uniforms at this particular. They were kind of a cross between the revolutionary uniforms of the Revolution, the long waistcoats, and the pointed or kind of square looking top hats that were getting ready to become before the War of 1812 and such. So getting to know a little bit about the research, whereas the French uniforms, they were easy to find. There were paintings of them all over the place. They were very well established. But having every one of these characters in models and in my studio, and even some of in this particular case also, this is the treaty signing of the Osage between General Clark of the Lewis and Clark expedition, who is at this point the Indian agent in charge of all the tribes west of the Mississippi. And this happened in what later became Springfield, Missouri. And he was signing a treaty that would bring the Osage Nation down into what later became Indian Territory or Oklahoma. Usually when I get a commission like this, it's just nothing but facts. And Mike, you have to turn these facts into something historical. In this case, the treaty, the peace treaty that set aside much of the land for the 5 civilized tribes happened in Fort Smith, Arkansas. So I went to Fort Smith, Arkansas, still standing. Just trying to absorb nothing more than the historical aspects, what's still there. And in this particular room, it wasn't this room that the treaty took place, but it was a room very similar. And so I used some of the architectural elements, like these columns in the middle of the room. You can see this belt buckle design that was painted on the columns. That was one of those details that had been left over. The large coffin door, as they called it, over there where the people would come in, how wide the door was. And so I took what I could and start thinking. Now I'll do these thumbnails, 10, 20, 30, and they're small. They're about the size of a place card. I'm not really spending a lot of time. I'm just thinking about composition more than anything. So they look like little stick figure drawings. Well, this is the one that I ended up liking and my client liked. And from there, it's a matter of start bringing these images to life. I fill in the gaps with facts. You know, I find costumes, I rent costumes, I have costumes made, I bring in models into the studio, I start placing them in position, I take photographs, I make sketches, and at all the same time, I have my point of view determined where my horizon line is, where everything's at, and then I'll start placing, because I don't bring in the models all at once, I just start placing on tape in my perspective where they would be. So I know that my viewpoint is always correct. And I have my light sources set up. And then I just have the model, me and the model, one model at a time, maybe two occasionally. And it's just working, taking photographs, doing the sketches, bringing that elements together. I will do a couple of really quick color studies. I take my sketch, in this case, I print it out on a small 8.5 by 11 sheet of canvas. And then I just do these really quick color studies in oil on top of it. It's easy to make these variations. Sometimes now I might even do it digitally if I'm in a real big hurry. I'm still a painter, I like painting. And then from there, you can see the transition to the final oil painting itself. I use my son Eli as an Indian over here. He's much taller. Eli is actually 6'5". He's a really tall gentleman. So I had to use him and shorten him up over here. And then I made myself one of the Indian agents here with my beard and my red vest. So it looked like I probably worked for the government over there in the background. Another one, this time the signing of statehood, bringing Oklahoma's proclamation, signing Oklahoma into statehood by Teddy Roosevelt. I'm still around. You don't realize I'm as old as I am. I was actually there in 1907. You can see the evidence right there on the left. I'm a reporter writing about the very events going on. A series of paintings done for the George Washington Carver Museum in Missouri. And so these are paintings depicting George Washington Carver's childhood. And they hang in, they're part of the regular collection there in the museum as well. I do a lot of portraits. This is what you guys are here for. I love doing family portraits. I love doing, historical portraits. The very first portrait I did for the state capitol was of Wiley Post. The second one was of Chief Standing Bear, the one you see on the right. He was the Ponca chief who was forcibly moved from Nebraska. His whole tribe was moved into Oklahoma. I do a lot of portraits for universities, for different colleges, whether buildings are named after couples who give a lot of money, as the Fowlers did on the left, or as we see here on the right, the chancellor for the University of Arkansas. Judges, the chief judge of the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, Robert Henry, who later became my boss. And one of the courthouses was named after this judge on the right. And so this was a much larger portrait. It's almost 8 feet tall, actually. So it's a large portrait that hangs at the very end of the 10th Circuit Court. It's the main courthouse there in Denver, Colorado. I do a lot of politicians. These are the pro tem senators from Oklahoma, from different regions. I've painted, I think now, the last 12 pro tems in Oklahoma. I do a lot of university and doctors as well. We see on the left, the mayor of Oklahoma City, Ron Norick. This was for the Oklahoma City University, Ron Norick building. He had just donated a number of dollars for, I believe it was an athletic center at the Oklahoma City Museum. And of course, T. Boone Pickens, who was an Oklahoma's son of Oklahoma. And this was for his headquarters. And then also I did a smaller version of this again for the state capitol. Now, the funny thing about T. Boone was he was much friendlier than I expected him to be. He was very kind, very generous. He loves OSU, Oklahoma State University. He gave $250 million to the state to build their new stadium. So of course, that's why the football helmet is there as well. Well, if you know anything about T. Boone, he's been married a few times. And so he had asked me to paint his wife for one of their homes in West Texas. And so I painted his wife. And then I get a phone call from his assistant about 7 years later. So, well, Mike, how you doing? Doing well. Steve, everything okay? I said, yes. And well, I don't know if you heard, but T. Boone's got married again, so he needs another portrait. So I did another portrait of the new Mrs. Pickens again. So, T. Boone was keeping me busy there for a while. Just for every so often, I was getting to paint a new wife. So it's kind of funny. One of my favorite paintings was an artist, Charles Banks Wilson. Charles Banks Wilson was the artist that probably made the biggest influence on me as a kid. He had painted these huge historical murals in the rotunda of the Oklahoma State Capitol. And so when Charles was asked to paint the portrait for the chancellor of the University of Arkansas, Charles was up in age at the time. He said, no, 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 you don't want me. You want this kid, Mike Wimmer. He's the best portrait artist I've seen around for a long time. Well, the fact that he called me a kid for one thing, and the fact that he knew my name was even greater. I had known Charles's work literally since I'd been in junior high and went to the state capitol as a junior high student. I was one of the presidents of my class. And so I saw that artwork up there. And I had always thought if I could ever have one of my paintings in the state capitol like this, I would just be overwhelmed with honor. Well, since then, I've painted 48 paintings that now hang in the Oklahoma State Capitol. So I've got more paintings in the state capitol than even Charles. And so when Charles was being honored as one of Oklahoma's living, historical masters, he asked me to paint his portrait. So I painted Charles's portrait also, and it was a great opportunity for me to paint his portrait as well. I've been teaching, like I said, for years, and this is one of my favorite models, teaching in class. I've been teaching every kind of method, illustration method, digital, painting, traditional, every kind of medium. I teach in the water mediums and the, traditional oil mediums and pastel. Epi was just one of those models that just became a friend. He was homeless for many years, and I was able to use him on a fairly regular basis so often. He got him a small little apartment. We just became friends. He would call me in the middle of the night sometimes. Mike, I don't know if you've ever seen this movie, but he's finally gotten cable TV. That was the difference. And so he's just staying up hours a night watching cable TV. I don't know if you've ever heard of this movie, but it's a really great movie. I just thought I'd tell you about it. And so we had a great conversation back and forth for years until I moved here. So I miss Epi, Epi Munoz. He was just one of those super humble fellows, but look at the mileage on that face. I mean, you could talk about, the different color temperatures and variations going on right there. It was a lot of fun. I do a lot of sculpture as well. This is a series of commissions for Lee Allen Smith. I painted his portrait first, and then I've done a couple of monumental sculptures in the Hall of Fame garden. And this is out there at the state capitol, not state capitol, at the state fairgrounds. And so you can see me by the sculpture on the far right. You'll see the large clay and the little maquette. Paint things for fun. It's always fun to paint beautiful women as well. So these are just paintings done for fun, personal work, some other things I've done for fun. I love history. I love the West and being able to, I love painting the costumes and all the textures of things at the same time too. So I show all this just because with all the work I do for clients, with all the commissions I do, I still paint for my own pleasure just as much. I've started a series of paintings about 5 years ago. It started when I was teaching at OCU, Oklahoma Christian University, or City University. And I would drive back and forth, and on this main thoroughfare would always be somebody holding these cardboard signs up. We'll work for a hand up, we'll work for food, we'll work for whatever. And seeing that every day just mentally started working in my head. And I would start asking questions like, what is it that I work for? What is it that I give my time and my talents and my passions for? And so I started asking friends, what is it they work for? It's just a reaching out, a kind of a soul. I was curious. I mean, what is it that makes us who we are, our mission statements for life or whatever? And it just became a mission for me to paint all these different stories. So anybody who's willing to pose for me, any walk of life, any profession, I don't care. I'm more about your story. It's about making and painting their story. I do these paintings for myself. I just do them for fun. The man that's on the left there was one of the first ones I did. He was a carpenter working at my house, and I noticed all these scars he had on his arm and on the back of his head and stuff like that, and started talking to him. His name is Dwayne Johnson. And I was just talking, Dwayne, what's your story? Where'd you come from? I'm a talker. What can I tell you? Well, Dwayne had been a Crips gang member in LA and had to move to Oklahoma to save his life. He was afraid he was going to die and moved here and straightened his life up and became a grandfather. This is him as a grandfather now. And he raised his family here in Oklahoma. And this was his sign. This was the sign he wanted to be portrayed, and he wanted painting. And so this is how I painted him in his working gear. I'm working as the artist in residence at a large major hotel downtown Oklahoma City. I'm in a glass bowl is really what I am. I'm on show, but it was a great setup because they paid me every month to have a studio and gave me free food. And all I was supposed to do was just intermingle with the public from time to time. I had this group of kids, obviously homeless and smelled terrible. Who knows how long it had been since they had a bath. And they came and knocked on the window, and I saw them, and I invited them in, and just asked them their story. I could see they were hungry. I bought them a meal and started talking to them and just said, hey, where you guys been? They've been hoboing across the United States. So I asked if they'd be willing to pose for me. And so every one of them posed for me. I gave him some money to pose. And I was pulling out a piece of cardboard for him to make a sign with. He just pulled this sign right out of his guitar case, living on a prayer. So that was his cardboard sign. It was perfect. So I had to use that one. The one of my daughter at the bottom, another one who is a public speaker on the right, this family that has really done everything they can they own a store in Oklahoma City that all they sell are products that are made in America. They won't sell anything that's not made or shipped. Every 100% of the objects have to be made, and it has to be all made, completely made and created here in the United States. And that's their store. And so I have him and his wife, almost like the old Grant Wood painting, standing there next to one another. I've been a teacher, and it's been an accidental thing for me for the most part. I was asked to teach because I knew some things, and so I started teaching. And I've continued to teach even after I quit teaching full time. I was teaching through workshops, portrait workshops, or I would visit schools to talk about my children's books and do little workshops for kids. And it's one of those things. My mom was a school teacher, so she's had a huge impact on my life. She is the one who introduced me to reading. And it was through books that I really became an artist. It was those pictures, it was those stories, the imagination. And that's why I became an artist, it's mostly books. And so education, without knowing it, has been a huge part of my life. And it's continuing to be so. As a teacher, I continue to show some of the processes and the workshops. And this is one I put together of the portrait I did of Obama. And it was meant to be a workshop portrait. I was doing it for a 4-day workshop for my students. And you can see a little of the process I might work. If I'm working alla prima, it's just all painted at once. I love that. I think most of us do too, but there's a challenge. I mean, painting directly, if you mess up, oh my God, you only get one shot, the chance, the wet into wet. But at the same time, it's just so freeing and spontaneous, and you get beautiful effects. Well, this is a different approach. In this case, I'm going to build up it's almost a very, very old technique. If we think of the different kinds of approaches to underpainting, the underpainting is usually called a grisaille, simply because the word means gray, nothing more than that. And in the French Academy, the grisaille would have been painted as gray. And if we think of the Italian school, it tended to have this kind of green underpainting, which was really the mixture of white, black, and yellow ochre, the three, very easy earthy colors. And they create this greenish or verdaccio underpainting, a grisaille that's kind of a slightly green. And the Dutch would more or less paint in a brunei, or this brown underpainting. It gave this deep resonance and warmth, which makes a lot of sense for skin tones. It just looks good to have those warm shadows. One of the things I was also talking about to the students, when you're picking your subject matter and you're picking, the scene or the view from which you paint your portrait, you want to be as honest, you want to be as flattering as possible. But at the same time, how do you do that when your subject matter might not be the most attractive, or maybe he has these things called ears that stick out far too much that maybe aren't the best, but just turning the head a little bit, the ears are no longer a problem. Using a strong light source to get that nice core shadow, to chisel out the cheekbones and that sort of thing too. Using all these different elements to flatter your sitter and your subject matter, but at the same time be true to life to his position. And I love this warm, cool, the blue and the orange kind of composition. So it's painted usually the first day in this case in one skin. And this is kind of the workshop that I'm going to share with you guys in February, where I'm going to paint the underpainting for you as I would do it with really 3 colors. It's a burnt sienna, Or maybe use 4. In this case, it's a burnt sienna or a transparent oxide red. And I love transparent oxide red because it mixes beautifully with white and gets a nice, pretty, rich, orangey color. And then, but I also can lighten a color with yellow because it's lighter than the transparent oxide red. So I'll use yellow to a certain degree. And the only when I need to go lighter than that will I add white. And then the shadows themselves are usually nothing more than a little bit of transparent oxide red with either raw umber or sometimes just blue, just to deepen that dark color. And my lights tend to get more opaque. I tend to keep the shadows very thin and transparent and translucent, because when you think of shadows, really, shadows are nebulous in nature. They're not a solid, they're see-through. So I always paint my shadows is very thin and glazy anyway. But the light is where you get information. And so I tend to build my lights up with a lot of paint, make it really thick. I like that texture. You can have more or less texture depending on what your subject matter is. And so you'll see at the very end, the second painting here at the end will be where I would end that day. It's only painted in monochromatic. Let that dry. And then the third one, I'll come in and I start painting with thin translucent color, but you can see how I'm also establishing those transitions from the warm to cool. So I always make sure I never just leave a hard line, let my transitions be part of my underpainting. And then the fourth day I'll come in and I'll get it pretty close, 85% finished. And then of course, the last day, well, that's when I come in with any thin glazes. I really bring out any details, make sure the highlights are pure. The glazes, now it may not be the exactly fourth day. If the paint's not dry, it's not dry. I have to give it time to dry. But it's my fourth approach or fourth skin when I want that translucency to get those nice subtle transitions of color where you get that modulation of skin tone. And that's done with thin transparent glazes. Same in the lips, you know, around the blueness of the eyes or something like that too, just to get that translucency of skin. And again, you can see what I'm talking about when I'm losing my edges and letting them soft, right? There's those transitions where the warms go into the cools. I don't want that to be a hard edge. I want it to be a fading edge, a turning edge. And so that's where I'll let that edge slowly blend into the blue to have that little tickle of color back and forth. And some of the other demonstrations I'll do for class, you know, I'm teaching all kinds of things. And I'm doing, in this case, I'm teaching a class called Anatomy and Rendering. So we're creating anatomy, not only human anatomy, but also any kind of creatures and anatomy and that sort of thing as well. The composition of pictures and how pictures are put together. These are two paintings, both done in oil. One of the Kraken, you know, the below and the above. Then also we see Batman here at the same time. And I'll show them when building a character that you don't have a real Batman in front of you. You build him up from a model. You can beef him up if you need to. You know, hopefully you lit him in a way so you at least see where the shadows are. You build the character or you build a frame from the anatomy up and then start adding the elements around. This would be done in, you know, I would do a lot of my underpainting or even my sketches maybe quickly in color on Procreate on an app for my iPad, or I might do it on Photoshop if I just need quick visualizations, because I'm in the 21st century now. So much faster than to do these kind of little color studies that I used to do forever in oil. I can do them now on my digital iPad. So much faster. And then the fun for me is I can paint them traditionally or I can paint them digitally. I prefer traditional painting. It's just my pleasure. So when I'm doing these things for my students, I'll do something like this. Now, the one that you see over here on the left, that's the first one I did. That's the digital copy. I did that as a digital demonstration first for my students. And then one of the students said, well, can you paint that in oil? And I said, sure, I can. And so I filmed myself doing it in oil and shared it with the class over the next 2.5 weeks. And that shut him up. You know, it's just to show him that, yeah, you can do these kind of things as well too, but also to show how it was planned and how you would use text. As an illustrator, you know, you're creating an image that's going to be used to sell something. So that negative space is part of a beautiful composition, but it's also there for a reason at the same time too. And then some of my paintings, whether they're done digitally, in this case on the left would be a digital painting. It's a photo bash technique where you'll take photographs, you cut them apart, you put them together, you put some color on back and forth, and you render on top of it. It's a quick way of doing it. This was done in class as a demonstration over 2 days. But the painting on the right, as you see behind me, is a traditional oil painting. And it would take a couple of weeks to paint something this in depth. And the images themselves are painted, or the nights, I should say, are from my many trips and photographs of going to reenactments, and just have a large collection of photographs and just putting them together to show them how you use these elements to start with. You're not copying photographs. This scene never happened, but you're using these elements to refer back to bring your painting or your ideas to life, nothing more. And of course, this was fun, exploring Georgia. I don't know much about Georgia, so I'm learning more and more about it as I go along. As I said, we've been teaching online for quite some time, since last March. So this summer, my wife and I took a trip up to the mountains of Georgia where it was cooler, and we got to hike and explore a beautiful area. And I noticed these little gnomes everywhere. If you're really quiet and don't make any noise, they start coming out. But what I was really noticing, all these beautiful trees next to the river, and they look like they could be gnome homes. That's what they look like to me. And so I turned this into a gnome home, and it's done in oil. And as you can see here, the link to my videos is on YouTube, and I'll share this with you guys later. A bunch of these videos I've made for no other reason, for fun, just to share with my students, to share with others how I put it together, my process, my thinking process. And you can see that there was nothing there. The river was true, the tree was true, but there were never real trees in this particular image, in this particular place. And then I've just added and subtracted and put things together until I had a gnome home, and just having fun with it, understanding how light travels. And then you can see he's on his way home. He's way back here, just he'll be home in just any minute. He can't wait to see what's for dinner. And this one was done in oil, but this one was done in Photoshop. And I did this as a demonstration for a Photoshop painting, just to show, again, when you're building a painting, you're building a painting. And my principles, whether I'm painting digitally or whether I'm painting traditionally, are pretty much the same. Vague to specific, dark to light, background to foreground. And in this particular case, I was painting pretty much on one layer for most of the painting. The effects, if you don't know how to paint digitally, it's a magic trick. It's a different way you have to force a different way of thinking, because you're not really painting with pigment. You're really painting with these things that look like stamps, that are brushes that turn the illusion into stamps. So it takes a while to learn the process and the thinking process. And for me, it was the most frustrating. I was ready to throw my computer through the screen, I don't know how many times, trying to teach myself to paint digitally. It's just not normal. We all know, after years of brush mileage and practice, you can take one single paintbrush and you can drag it, and you can push it, and you can pull it, and you can do all kinds of cool effects with it. You can't do that with a digital brush. You have to have a certain kind of brush to get a certain kind of effect. So I usually would paint with around 10 or 12 different brushes, and I just quickly grab one random, just for noise, mess it up and then fix it, mess it up and then fix it. And that's how I learned to paint digitally. And my process works pretty well. Again, working with light and dark and shadow allows these kind of cool atmospheric effects that I can get digitally. This was a presentation I put together, and I think we have a little bit more time, so I'd like to go into just about how to think, like making a picture. So this was a whole nother lecture that I put together for my students on composition, on how to make a picture, and I'm using some of the examples of my own work. But this was that cover of Tom Sawyer, and thinking a little bit about it, where pictures come from, how you balance positive against negative. I try to tend to think, in all kinds of uses. There's not a formula. There's not one particular formula that works. What you're realizing, a picture is nothing more than a story. It's a narrative. What I've learned a long time ago, and especially from my study of the masters and my study of the great illustrators, N.C. Wyeth, Howard Pyle, Schoonover, that whole group, they would tell you to paint with no more than 4 values in a painting. Keep the value patterns, very simple. You get too many more than that, and you really overcomplicate a painting. So if you look at the painting on the left, this is one of the paintings I did for the book Pilgrim's Progress, where Christian is meeting Apollyon and throwing the fiery darts of hell at him and that sort of thing too. Well, I don't have a armor suit, but I have armor toys. And so I had my model, dress up so I could see how the armor was put together and get that cool representing the, the heavenly light versus the warm, the hellish light at the same time too. But if you look at the upper right, my light pattern, it's almost this little pattern of light coming down in this circle that I'm using to push back into the focal point. So you can see starting here at the top, bringing that light pattern down through the characters, back up through. And it just keeps the eye coming back to my focal point, the darkest dark, the lightest light, using contrast also to grab your attention. You can't help but look here. It's like watching a black and white police car pull up next to you. It grabs your attention. That contrast grabs your attention. And then you can see, for the most part, predominantly warm with a few color notes here at the same time too. Another one of the paintings from Pilgrim's Progress, we're using framing devices now to frame the picture, to push ourselves into the focal point. This is the point where we're seeing, again, if we see the black and white composition, the dark framing elements, and then how I've used these contrast popping of heads to bring and tell us what are our primary focal points. These are the most important parts of the painting. And I'm making you look at them, whether you want to or not. You can't look away from them simply because using devices like the framing elements and contrast to focus your eyes on my focal points. Another painting from Pilgrim's Progress here. You've probably heard, in this case, it's value, value, value. I'm using contrast, that big, massive shape of the darks as we see over here on the right. And then also creating that illusion of depth, atmospheric perspective, less contrast, less gray to the distance, more contrast as we build forward, that'll help. And then even small little details, like just that little eye. It doesn't take much sometimes, just to bring a little bit more attention to what I want you to look at too. You're also seeing how these characters really get lost in this massive gray down here, except for that red. That one piece of red stands out from those other colors at the same time too. None of this is accidental. It's all on purpose when it comes to building a picture and leading the eye. This is Christian coming to the cross, and we can see some of those same elements again, contrast, warms against cools, lights against darks, hard edges against soft edges, again, focusing our eye towards, in this case, from the crypt, following this line back up to the cross. And it's just all the devices that I would use, but also notice the higher key light source. It makes it feel happier. This is the promise after being thrown in the dungeon, and the darks and the grays and the browns and the umbers. And now look at the color sources change completely. Our feelings and our emotional impact have changed completely just as well. Here's another one of my paintings from the children's book, All the Places to Love. And this is a story about a little boy, named Eli, which is my son. And he's also a little boy I use as the model. And just using movements and contrast to point, almost like the little tangent arrows keep pointing also and guiding our eye to the focal point. Same as going on here. High key colors, very bright. This is the day that Eli was born. Notice that little halo of light around that dark head. Notice all these other tangents, such as the arrows. They look like arrows, but they're really architectural devices pointing down, pointing all towards this little area right here. Even if we find these arrows, the folding of the cloth coming up, everything's moving us in that direction. It's all pointing back to the center that I want you to look at. Now, also a painting like this has a little bit of a device in it. My grandmother, when we were expecting Eli, told me, this is Mike, if you want a baby boy, you need to tie a blue ribbon to the bedpost, and that'll guarantee that you have a boy. Said, Grandma, what have you been drinking? That's so silly. I never heard of such a thing. But we did it. And so it worked for us. So that's why I put in this particular painting a little blue ribbon tied to the bedpost. This particular blanket is my blanket. It was my great grandmother who made this blanket for me when I was born. So I still have this grandmother's flower garden blanket as well too. Here's another painting of Eli as he's growing up on the farm. And again, this time I'm using contrasts. I'm using S-shaped contrast against these vertical line contrasts that bring attention. Also, just this little trick of creating something in between us and our focal point gives us the illusion that we're almost voyeuristically a part of this image. We are part of this image now. We're not just watching it from afar, we're right there. Just by bringing in a foreground element from time to time will create this illusion at the same time as well. You can see I'm using these primary colors. They're muted, but they're still the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue against these nice cool greens, the cools against the warms, and that hard edge contrast to the yellow and black on the tortoise in its shell to really bring more attention between the two focal points. The real focal point is that interaction between Eli and the turtle. But how do you do that? What elements are you using as a picture maker to make these things more? And again, you don't even notice I'm doing it. You're just looking at what I want you to look at. And that's all I'm using are some of the very same, what we call the foundational elements of art, whether it's line, whether it's value, whether we're using directional lines, we're using perspective. And if we keep our value system simple, it doesn't get too complicated. We can control it a little bit easier. Another one of my children's books called Summertime. And here you can see, again, that framing device. This was the front and back cover. It's the wraparound cover. And you can also see that creates a problem. You know, as an artist, I want a beautiful painting, right? But I also know it has to serve the purpose for being a front cover. But when it's closed, the back cover is also a work of art. And I want that compositionally to look just as pleasing. So that's how I broke these down, just so you can see. This was a nice painting of what the back cover would look like. This would be just what the front cover would look like. This is what it looks like when it's got its text on it. So all of these devices have to be planned. And so you're making decisions that most people don't even notice or take note of what's going on. But storytelling device is, what are they looking at? This framing device of the tree, the leaves, the characters, bringing us back here. And then here, that contrast between the tree line in the background, that shiny metal roof, the farm and the home, that's the real focus, home. You know, back in the time when they're not rich by any stretch of imagination, but their whole universe is right here. Also using motion and movement, using line, using composition, that pyramid. In this case, it's an off-centered pyramid. Automatically makes us feel like it's leaning to one side. Now, of course, we read from left to right in the English language. So for the most part, you want to kind of lead, especially if I want to lead you to the next page, to turn the page, I want to lead you to the right. Otherwise, I could have led you to the left, but it would have made you want to go left instead. And using slight devices like this fence post. That fence post does not have to be there, but it's put there for a reason, to act as a leading line that just happens to line up with his shoulder and brings you also to the focal point, the darkest dark against the lightest light, the contrast. It's the peak, it's the pyramid peak at the same time too. That outstretched line creates another line that runs into his head that takes us right back here to the church. We can see the parents and grandparents are almost lost because their values are, there's not a lot of contrast there in those values. So they're secondary focal points. It leads us back to the secondary. But again, those lines, also those perspective lines being led here, those arrows that are following the fence line, also are devices that are bringing us into, and that I'm even following it with paint strokes and brush strokes that are leading me in the same direction. So everything's subtly reinforcing your eye to the focal point. Here's that Tom Sawyer one again, the same kind of thing, talking about 3 paintings in one. You have the major painting, the big painting by itself, you have the cover, and then you have the back cover. You even have the spine itself has to look good, knowing that there's going to be text there. Is there anything going to get in the way? Guys, I've got more to cover, but it looks like we've gone a little bit further. If you want more, or if you'd like to ask questions, I'll let you guys take a break, or I can keep showing you images. I can go as far as you guys want to go. What would you guys like to do?
Mike, this has been phenomenal. Just awesome. I love it. My thoughts are, how did you get so much done in your lifetime? You're young.
Well, I'm glad you say I'm young, but to me, I don't know. My students ask me the same thing. Today in business class, as a matter of fact, we were talking about the secret. One of the greatest secrets to success is time management. And so I have a whole presentation where we talk about time management and how you market your time and how you have to be conscious of that. And so I'm a very disciplined person. I think that's by my nature, but at the same time, I got a lot of dreams. I got things to do. I don't know. I'm driven in some ways at the same time too. I'm still very boyish in many ways. I like to play, but my students ask me, but don't you like to have fun? And I say, you know what's fun? You know what's really fun? You know what's really, really, really fun? Being good. That's fun.
Yeah.
It's extremely rewarding. So, I mean, I love it. And these are things that I do. This is, another painting from All the Places to Love. You can see some of the paintings from that book. It's been my most popular book. It's one that's done extremely well. It's all written from the premise of a little boy.
What was the name of that?
It's called All the Places to Love. It was written by Patricia McLaughlin. You guys might know her. She's very famous author. And of course, summertime, I would sing this song to my kids every night before we go to bed. It was just a reason to hold on to them one more, 10 seconds or 15 seconds longer. And I did it so long, I started seeing the story taking shape in my head as if it were told from the little girl's point of view and how she grows up to be the mom and all that kind of stuff too. So it's just, a beautiful painting. It's not about being rich in money, but being rich in love, even with the simplicity and the poverty that you would see in Oklahoma, you see here in Georgia at the same time too. I love that expression on her face. It says it all. And then their expression says, whatever she's got on that line is bigger than what they've been catching over here with those tiny little perch. It's just telling those stories. And I love being a storyteller. I don't know about you guys, but I watch movies and then I watch them again without the sound on. And I ask myself, does it say the same thing? And if it does, it's because someone's a great cinematographer. They've used composition and value and line and color to make my emotions work. I'm just a storyteller. That's really what I like to do more than anything else. Look at that head. That's the focal point. That darkest dark against the lightest light right there. Your daddy's rich and your ma is good looking. Hush, little baby, don't you cry.
And you can sing. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
Melissa had a question. Melissa, can you unmute and ask the question that you had asked?
Sure.
Please, Melissa.
Wow, I'm blown over. You've done it all.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you.
Awesome. I really love your work, Mike. Something that I had a question about was licensing. You said that you've created all these pieces. How do you find the clients to then have those pieces marketed?
That's strange and funny. Some of them find me, and then almost all the secondary marketplaces have been found. They come to me. They see the images and they want to reuse them. Okay. I do have an agent in New York and I have one on the West Coast, so they help at the same time as a conduit for some of those licensing. My wife and I were licensed through, I'm trying to remember the name of the company. They were out of Missouri for a while, and they finally closed their doors, so they would bring in stuff. But American Greetings has looked at the stuff. I've had plates sold. There are about 5 major jigsaw puzzle companies in the United States. And so they're always looking for art.
Okay.
Walmart themselves will license some of that stuff to put under their own name. And so they've licensed images. They've come to me and licensed things for packaging, for books. I just sold, I've got my newest book. Let me see if I can back up and quickly. I think I've got an image of it. Here you see. Newest book is Hamilton. It just came out last month. Cool. It's one of 5 paintings or books I've been doing on the presidents of Mount Rushmore and the founding fathers. Well, this was now packaged together with these other 4, and it's being released as a secondary license, as a secondary market to be for all the Costco stores in the United States. So that's an initial run of an additional 15,000 of 5 books. So that's 15,000 times 5. They're paying me a royalty for each of those at the same time too. So it'll be a nice little fat check that turns up, you know, and that'll be by advance against future royalties. Not to mention its other royalties that are the hardback edition from Simon and Schuster. So
you're wealthy.
Specifically on the royalties, sorry.
That's all right.
I was
What was
just
it?
gonna say specifically, like money wise, I have no idea what, you know, what, can you give us some specifics in terms
Sure,
of
absolutely.
what?
Usually when I'm doing a children's book now, I've got enough of a record of sales that my average is around $40,000 in advance against a royalty for the book. And so I'm doing anywhere from 17 to 20 paintings for a book. And then my royalty rate is 5% of the retail price of the book. So say the book sells for $20. What is a 5% of that's $1, you know, and then the author is getting $1 also. And then so once I've sold enough books that it covers the 40,000 advance, I can then get royalties on top of that. So the book has to sell pretty well in order to cover that first $40,000 advance. It has to sell 40,000 copies. And after that, and so far, knock on wood, my books usually do after about 3 to 5 year range. That's why they keep paying me the advance. And then the secondary market, if it goes into paperback, Scholastic picks it up and they'll pay an additional royalty for that paperback edition or something along those lines too. Any other books like the Costco series, that's a special edition series. And so they always get a better knockoff price than what the original price would have been, but they're buying the whole package and they want to buy 15,000 copies at once. So because you're buying at a greater mass from the publisher at once, they get a better price on the deal. So my royalty on that would only be maybe 15 cents a book as opposed to $1 a book, but I get the money up front, which is already in addition to the sale price that I've been paid for the other edition. And one of the things, I have a lawyer coming into my class tomorrow, and this is something you guys may know about or may not know about. It's the Georgia Lawyers for the Arts. It's a great organization. I've known about it since I've been here for 4 years, but almost every state has an organization where the lawyers and arts work together to help, you know, protect the artists so they know what their rights are for copyright, what are copyright infringements, you know, intellectual property rights law. They would be happy to come to this organization and talk to you guys on one of your meetings if you'd ever want them to. And they'll talk about licensing. And they do it for music because Georgia is really well known for movies. They do a lot of stuff for screenwriters and for photographers and actors at the same time too, but artists as well. So of course, I've been teaching this business class for so many years. As soon as I moved to Georgia, I contacted this organization. In Oklahoma, we had one called OVAC. It was Oklahoma Visual Arts Coalition. And almost every state does. And for $50 a year, it's your membership. There's a lot of workshops you're entitled to. Plus, should you ever need legal advice, it gives you up to 5 hours of free legal advice for that $50. You're not going to find any other lawyer give you, 5 hours worth of advice for $50. I promise.
Is that as an individual?
Yeah, that's as an individual.
Yeah.
And but they would still love to come to talk to your group just for nothing. I mean, that's what they do. They're spreading the message of the legality, intellectual property rights for these organizations. He comes to my group every year. Matter of fact, every quarter he's coming to talk to my business class. And he's coming tomorrow.
What is
and he
his
just
name?
does it for free. His name is Matt. His name is Matt Goins. But I'll send you the information so you can contact their website. They're right there in Atlanta. And so they call themselves GLA, GLARTS, so Georgia Lawyer for the Arts, but they teasing themselves call it the Georgia Lawyers of Atlanta because most of them are in Atlanta. So you guys are covered anyway.
Well, that's great to know that.
Yeah, and it's a huge help. So how many of you guys are Babe Ruth or baseball fans? This is one of my series called Home Run about Babe Ruth. just him, his biography. At first, I thought this was a book about a famous baseball player. I really found out after studying about Babe Ruth, this story is about a little boy who never grew up. That's what this book is really about.
And that shows up in your art.
Oh,
well,
Mike, when you talked about your book Advance, the 40,000, is that because you've built up to that over,
yes,
30,
I've built up to that. On average, for most typical publishers these days, if it's your first book, it's going to be anywhere from $6,000 to $8,000 advance against royalties. That's not bad. That's a pretty good starting. And you think, man, that's a lot of work for 20 paintings if you're doing them like this. But it's an advance. You still own all the rights to the art. Only thing I sell for these books are the rights to the art to be used for the book. I can relicense these images any way I want to. I can sell the paintings if I want to. I own and retain all the copyrights to my images.
And when you said that you had an agent, what kind of agents do licensing?
Well, there are licensing agents that literally just do nothing. There's a organization, if you go to Surtech, every year is in New York. There's another one in Dallas area. I don't know if and I don't know Georgia well enough, but Atlanta's a big market. I would imagine there might even be a World Trade Center here in Atlanta, maybe, where they have a market every year. In Dallas, they have one, but the big one's in New York City. And in Surtech, it's usually in the spring, where every paper manufacturer, every clothes manufacturer, every greeting card manufacturer, and a lot of the artists who are licensing, they all come together into the Javits Center. I think that's where it was last time. And they're showing and selling their wares and looking at things. And you pay to have a table there or whatever. And they're coming in, some of the buyers are coming in for these large organizations like Kohl's or Carter's or wherever, and they're looking at design. Oh, we love this. We want to license this, or we want to buy this. Can we use this image for our cards, or can we put this on our greeting, our jigsaw puzzles? And so they have agents that specialize in licensing. They sell different artists and represent different artists. My agent in New York he represents me as an illustrator, but he also licenses my work and works for me from time to time and represents me that way as well. There are also, as you guys know, portrait agents who work a little like agents who out there and find commissions and bring in work. Their commissions are higher. My agent charges 25%. For licensing, charges 15%. And so any commissions only charges 25%, but a portrait agent usually is somewhere between 40 to 60%, depending on who they are or what they are. So it's always a little bit different depending on, the markets themselves. Now, this particular painting was also my homage to Norman Rockwell. If you guys are big Norman Rockwell fans, you'll notice, see that guy way back there in the back? He's the same person that's standing up in the painting Freedom of Speech in Norman Rockwell's The Four Freedoms. I just cut his head to make it less obvious. And then I put all my friends in here as models for the book, as if they're posing, watching Babe Ruth knock it out of the park.
If you did 20, these are just beautiful. If you did 20 paintings for a book, like a child's book, do you do all those paintings on that large scale that you were talking about?
Pretty much, yeah. All of these are 30 by 40s.
Oh, large.
And so now this one's I would not paint a head that big. 30 by 40 is too big. This is more like probably a 20 by 30, maybe something like that. It's much smaller. These are from Will Rogers. And so, yeah, they're all done on this scale. And I always usually sell all my paintings. All the Babe Ruth paintings are sold. I usually sell these to collectors or to different agencies. And so I have another sell afterwards. All the paintings for the Babe Ruth book sold to a private collector who loves baseball. All of these paintings from the Will Rogers book sold to an oil company in Oklahoma that I knew was then going to donate them to the Will Rogers Museum. So I got paid an additional fee for that. Here we can see a little bit of my thinking process again. This is some of the rough idea sketches for this particular painting. And we don't see Will Rogers, but we do. We see the effect of Will Rogers on the crowd. And if you look really close, so the person who wrote this book became a friend of mine. He was the governor of Oklahoma. His name was Frank Keating. So I invited Frank King and his wife to come pose for me in the studio. I invited them to dinner. Now, the problem is I forgot to tell my wife that they were coming to dinner until the day before. Oh, by the way, the governor's first lady are coming to dinner tomorrow. What? Yeah, I was in the doghouse for a while after that. My kids, though, were great. They loved it because the day before the governor shows up, the security detail shows up, and they've got guns and all that kind of stuff just to make sure the house is safe. And so the kids were like, wow, these guys are cool. And so that next day, the kids were there. We all had dinner together. They were great. They were so incredible. We've become great friends. We traveled together, do all kinds of things since then. But they came in, they dressed up in the appropriate costumes. I took the photographs. You can see how the photographs become part of the sketch. And then the sketch becomes the painting. And if you look really close, you can see reflected in the opera glasses is Will Rogers on stage performing one of his rope tricks.
Well, you are a storyteller.
I like telling stories. Yeah. I really do. You know, and then this is the first book. This is the first series we did in the Mount Rushmore series with Teddy Roosevelt, you know, and then another one about Jackie Robinson, Pilgrim's Progress. I did 60 paintings for this one. The private collector who commissioned these paintings bought all the paintings. So I bought all 60 of these as part of the commission.
I see a lot of Maxfield Parrish in your paintings. It's just incredible. It's beautiful.
And here we go, talking a little bit about the process. This is my studio in the back. And what we're seeing is me bringing a reenactor into the studio and dressing him up in the correct paraphernalia. This is a historical reenactment of Chief Standing Bear being forcibly evicted, really, from his space in the tribe from Nebraska to Oklahoma, Indian Territory. And I have a number of large scale but very accurate models that I've used and collected over the years. And you can see this wagon. And how would I put people in that wagon? The wagon's only this big, so how do I put people in them? Well, I use Photoshop. And so you can see some of my models. These are all members of the Ponca tribe and all elders of the Ponca tribe who pose for me. So I get their buy-in. I have them, you know, come pose for me. And then I can put that painting together using all those different separate elements together at the same time too. Another one where you'll see the finished painting, and you can see how it was them crossing the plains from Nebraska to Oklahoma, but how it's put together in Photoshop.
That's a question I had. You said you paint digitally. What programs do you use?
Well, I teach them. I can teach them all. I mean, just because you never know what the students are going to teach. Photoshop has become the industry standard, so it's the one that we probably use the most. But if you're on an iPad,
do you use Illustrator?
I use Illustrator. Illustrator is more of a vector base. It's great for logos and things like that. It's got a very hard edge. Illustrator itself is a mathematical program that if I expand it, I can make it infinitely sized and it'll be perfect resolution up to 20 feet tall if I want to. Right. Whereas Photoshop, you know what happens when you look at a Photoshop file and you expand it, the pixels just grow bigger and you get, yeah, exactly. It does not work the same at all. But Photoshop's a great photo editing software that accidentally became a painting software. It's really not. But if you guys have an iPad, one of the best, and it's $11. If you guys have an iPad, it's a Procreate. It's probably the absolute easiest to use digital drawing platform you'll ever come across.
Mike, I think Melissa has another question for you.
Sure, you bet.
Philosophical question. Melissa?
Okay.
Sorry, I don't want to steal the show here if others have questions.
No, not at all. Not at all.
I'm looking to help young people, encourage them to know that they can make a living as an artist. Mike, and I wonder how you encourage your students and help them to think creatively like you do, all these different areas.
Well, it helps. I mean, whether you like it or not, I think as artists, if we could fall back on what we would love to do is we would love someone just to pay us money and we would just not have to do anything but paint, right? And we don't care what we paint. We just don't live in that world. I'm sorry, you know. And not only is creating part of the process, that's part of it, but human relations are probably the biggest part when it comes to selling things. I was just teaching my business class today. Networking is probably going to be more important to you making a living than the quality of your brush language, simply because it's human beings we work with. If we can provide our clients a service or sell them a painting, and we make their life easy, they're more likely to come back and use us again over and over and over again for book covers, for logos, whatever it happens to be. Now, portraits are rare because not too many people will buy 5 and 6 and 7, 8 portraits unless you got a huge family, right? It just doesn't happen that way. But for my commercial work, my book covers, I have clients who will continue to use me and have used me for 30 years, year after year after year after year, for series of books or new book covers or different projects. Like I said, I had a commission come in today. It's a group in New York that puts together historical displays for historical museums all over the United States. And so this one's for Bryce Canyon Historical Museum for Mormons in the Paiute Nation. And so I'm been commissioned to paint some paintings that'll be used for that display. I'll do them. I'll paint them digitally. They won't even be real paintings or physical paintings, simply because for me, I look at the price, I look at the project, and I know it's never going to have an afterlife beyond that use. So I might as well just paint a digital file. I'll still own the rights to it that I could relicense if I wanted to as a digital file, you know, but I'll do it. I'll work on it digitally. I'll create it digitally. Anybody who sees the reproduction, they'll never know that it was a digital painting. It'll look like an oil painting. And so there's no reason to have a real oil painting. Now, if they were going to buy the original oil painting on top of that, I would do that and sell them and mark that price up, because that's a business. I'm creating something that has value, and I know that. One of the things we're talking about today when it comes to making a living, you know, I talk to parents almost as much as I talk to students. I was the chair of my department for years. And of course, every parent says, can you really make a living in art? You can't really make a living in art. My mom said the same thing to me. My mom was a college professor. When I told her I was not going to play football, she said, well, I'm not paying for college. That's a waste of money. And so that was my mom's response. And so I proved her wrong. I'm supporting her now, so it's okay. She, you know, Mike, you turned into a good son, Mike. You're a good son. But, you know, it's one of those things that right now there's a greater need and there's a greater market for art today than there ever has been. Think of every website that's buying artwork. Not only that, most of it's changed. You know, so many of us like me love magazines and love books, and that's where we get most of our art. We thought, well, fewer books are getting published, so there must be fewer art. No, games themselves outpaced the movie industry in profits about almost 10 years ago. Games, those video games that your grandkids and your sons and daughters are playing, they're making gazillions of dollars at that. And not only that, every game requires thousands of artists doing different things. And they're all specialized. So you never see one artist just doing one thing, or rarely, unless they're the high concept artists that are creating the look of the game. But there's so many. Look at the movie. I'm thinking Klaus. Did you guys see it with your kids or your grandkids? The Christmas movie that came out 2 years ago. I mean, that alone had an army of artists just to help create that. It's amazing. So there's a ton of work out there. The difference is the market's changed, simply because we have this world global market. We can get workers from anywhere in the world now. Why? Just the same way you and I are communicating, I can communicate to my agent in New York or a client in Australia, you know, and it doesn't really matter anymore how we do this and how we communicate to one another. As long as I can deliver what they need on time, I can give them what they want. The funny thing is, there are incredible artists out there that we would have never known of when I was growing up, simply because the only way to discover somebody is that they were published in a book or a magazine. Now on Instagram, I can go out and find 100 new artists that I've never seen in my life and just want to think, Why am I painting? I should just give up. Look how good these guys are. You know, they're everywhere. They really are. And I'm just as, sensitive to those things as every other artist is too. But I found there's plenty of art. There's plenty of work.
I would think a lot of us right now are thinking the same thing after looking at I might as well give up.
No, we're doing this because we love it. That's the reason we get good. We don't see it as even work after a while. The only time my work turns into work is when you put a deadline on it. And when you put a deadline on it, then it turns into work. Otherwise, I just get lost in it. Whether I'm painting this, scene behind me for fun or for a student project, or just a portrait that someone I meet, I get lost in. I put one of my books on tape, I listen to some, and I'm in the moment, and I don't ever want it to end. I love that. And then I step back. Oh, wow, that's magic. Who did that? Did I do that? You just get lost in it, I think so much in the beginning part of my process. That's why I pointed out to you and my students, it does take thought. It does take planning. But once I do the planning, the rest of it, I've already thought about it. Now it's just, did it work? Did it not work? Push, pull, get lost in the textures, get lost in the way the paint's gooeying around, and then you get frustrated. Scrape it off and start all over again. And then after a while, you're lost in it again. And that's the part. And, it's hard. It's not fun to start over or to adjust, as we call it. I tell my students, the only stroke that's a perfect stroke is the first one. Everything after that's an adjustment. It just is. And it's just the way it works.
It's 9 o'clock and we can keep going, but I just want to ask anybody on this call, does anybody have any questions?
Please, guys, remember I told you I weigh 200, almost 20 pounds, and I'm 59 years old. So I've answered all the hard questions. You can't hurt me now. Well, I did. Donna, do you want to remind them of when I'm going to do my demonstration? So if you guys want to watch along or paint along with me, I'm going to send to Donna the limited palette that I use just for this exercise. I will also send to her a digital file of the reference that I plan on using. So if you guys want to watch and then try it on your own, you can do that. If you want to paint along with me, you can do that. But it's nothing more than it's a beautiful young lady, and I've lit her with a single light source. So you can really see, and I'll talk about that as I'm setting up and why I use this particular one, how you get lost in the shadows and let the shadows get lost, but the information is in the light, and the choice of photographs and their approach to painting. And then I'll just show you how I work that, how I build that kind of transparent shadow stage at the beginning and pull the lights out and make more paint and thicker paint in the beginning. If you've seen those Rembrandts, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, they're just, you get up there, and I get up so close sometimes, I'm sure the security guards are wanting to knock me out. But you're looking at these things, and those shadows, there's like nothing there. You can see those layers of paint, transparent layers of paint through there, where you're seeing one little layer built on a part of another, and they're almost like watercolor. And then you look at the light, and it's like you put it on with a trowel. It's just those big, how is that described? It looks like, you look at a Rembrandt painting, it looks like you could pick it up by the nose. There's so much paint, there's so much thickness to it, so much body to it. And the effect, the visual effect of seeing it is almost like life. It's just, it's an illusion and it's a lie, but it's a really good lie. And I've tried to get better and better and better and better and better and better at those things myself. And, I'm still teaching. I teach a student, how do you make white even whiter? Well, a good portrait artist knows, that if I come in with white, but it's a really thick white, and I dab it in place, it's going to catch the highlights of the light itself. And so the light that's reflecting on that white highlight is going to appear even lighter. So, wow, I made white look lighter than white. And it's just by using the lights of the room and how you're doing. And those are just little effects that can really give that solid body to the paint itself or to a painting. And let those things that are in the shadow disappear and get lost. It's an illusion. That's all it is. I teach my students, I say, I'm going to teach you how to lie really well.
Mike, I had one more question if I can.
Sure, absolutely, you bet.
So when you talk about how promoting your work, were you born a salesman? Were you born a people person, or did you learn that over time?
Well, it's learned, but I'm still a people person. I've always liked people. And I mean, my favorite thing to read are biographies. I'm curious. I'm really curious about how people become these people that we call heroes or whatever. You know, why do we call them heroes? And again, I'm always sharing, and this is a great book. I don't know if you guys know this book or read it. It's Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers.
Yeah.
I love all his books. They're just incredible. And what I really love is how he breaks down that myth. Breaks down the myth. Oh, you know, these people were born geniuses. They were born talent. That's such bull, you know, and he breaks that down and really brings it up. There's so much involved with this person being who they become. There's not just one myth. It's just, that's not true. But that whole idea of an outlier, one of those things he talks about is the 10,000 hour rule in here, you know, because when I was teaching and I didn't really know about the 10,000 hour rule, I just knew my own experience. I said, there are no shortcuts. I wish there were, I would have found them, but there's not. I said, it takes whatever, this X number of hours to get from A to Z. Now, you can spread a lifetime and just do a little here and a little there. You'll get better. But if you haven't met that X number of hours, you're never going to be at that level you want to be yet. Or you can be one of those obsessed people like me who was drawing and painting at the age of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you know, and just making these things. And that's all I did. That's what I wanted to do. If I wasn't playing football, I was drawing or reading. I was that nerd, you know, I was that nerd jock in high school. Pimples. So the girls didn't look at me, but a really good body, but no one would look at me. So I drew, you know, so that took care of that at the same time too.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
That's awesome.
You're also a comedian. You're funny.
Yeah, well,
which is
I can't help the way I look, Donna, so don't make fun of me.
I wouldn't talk about your looks. Talking about your personality. This has been so great. I just want to thank you.
You guys are very kind. And I want to say, guys, I really, really, really am finally glad to get to meet all of you, even if it's this way. You know, it's better than not meeting you at all. So I really appreciate that. It's been fun. I hope we get to know each other better in real life eventually. You know, whenever this COVID thing finally lets us get back together so we can have our meetings and meet each other and have our workshops, and let me buy you a cocktail or at least drink one with you at the same time.
Well, we appreciate it.
It would be nice.
I know you said you had an early class in the morning, but we don't want to keep you, but I'm going to just remind everybody that you're doing on February the 27th, that's on a Saturday from 1 to 3, Mike's doing a demo for us. We can paint with him or just watch him do a demo. And Mike, I asked you just send me that image and
I will.
Information, and I'll get it out to everybody and they can start kind of preparing for it.
Perfect.
And
Will
also send me the information on that lawyer group.
Okay, I will.
Group, and I will send all that out.
If you are in the chat, I can tell you what they are right now. That's GLARTS.org. Glarts, or I misspelled that. Glarts.org. That's one of it.
See the chat.
And here is, I also promised I would share my website or the YouTube information if you guys want to go and watch some of those videos.
I've watched some of them, so y'all need to go watch. It's so informative.
Okay, and there we go.
But I will send this out also in an
there email
to our group.
And so they're just they're random. I'm sorry, guys, they're not super well organized. None of the videos themselves are. The information's organized, but you know, the students want to know something, I show them a little of this, I show them a little of that, I answer some questions here and there and put it together. I'm working on right now, and Donna's been seeing it, so I'm showing them on Saturdays. I'm working with how to paint this little gnome here, and so we put him in the dark and he's got light coming out and all this kind of stuff too. So one of the videos, or a series of the videos, are just the process, how I've got started and what I'm doing and what I'm thinking. So I'm just doing it on Saturdays. I usually spend about an hour and a half with them every Saturday. And so we're going to spend some time with you guys and my students on that Saturday and just do a head painting and show them a little bit about that as well.
I know everybody's going to look forward to doing that. And I just want to keep you, I just thank you so much. All of us thank you. And if we were all unmuted, they would be clapping a lot.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Mike.
Thank you.